Welcome! Here we're going to learn how to draw charcoal with actual pieces of charcoal from my grill. I have here an empty jar and I'm going to put a few pieces in and we're going to crush it down to a powder. You can crush this with anything. In this case I'm just using the hard end of a brush. You can use a hammer, you could use your finger if you really wanted to, or a mortar and pestle. So I grabbed some of that powder from my charcoal and just applied it on this mixed media watercolor paper cold press. You can use any paper though. And then here I'm showing you some general marks that were made with the charcoal. We're going to begin our landscape by creating a horizontal line with a few wavy variations. Then you're going to extend it out to the right, and then you're going to extend it out to the left, creating two beautiful hills. Now we're going to work on our tree. So a tree, it's really important that you keep the base the thickest part, and it gets skinnier and skinnier as you get to the top. I'm going to create two branches, one on the right hand side and one on the left hand side. Almost mirror image. And then I'm going to go ahead and just draw in a few extra branches. In this case, I'm doing this with just a regular pencil. Here I'm loosely creating some lines to get an outline of where the leaves are going to be on my tree. And now making sure that the base of my tree is even wider. Here I'm adding in a sun, so I like to either consider this as a sunrise or a sunset landscape painting. Now we're ready to use the charcoal. I'm going to start off by using a brush. If you don't have a brush, that's okay. You can use your fingers to blend. You could even use a sponge, as you see right there. Any house sponge will work to move around that charcoal and fill in the back sky area. I'm even going to use a Q-tip here for application just to show you that you can really use any household items that you may have to go ahead and draw with some charcoal. So I'm going to start from the top of my landscape where the sky is going to be the darkest, and as I drag it down it's going to become lighter and lighter as you get closer to the horizontal landscape line where the sun is set. This might take a while where you just apply your charcoal. I'm going to stick with the Q-tip for a little bit, and now I'm starting to block in my hill area. And I want my hills to register as fairly dark, so I'm being very generous with the charcoal in that area. Now you might have some charcoal dust on the background. That's great. As you can see, I'm using the brush and I'm using it just to smear it all over the place and trying not to waste any additional materials, in this case charcoal dust. And make sure that I also fill in the space in between my branches on my tree too, and making sure I'm not forgetting any specific area. And this will just be a continuation of blocking in the sky and working on creating my hills and making them darker. Still using the Q-tip and occasionally going now to bring in the actual charcoal bit that I have to create more contrast, so creating those darker lines. And I'm going to make sure that the darkest part is really going to be in my foreground or the closest area to me in my landscape. In this case, it would be the hills. Let's go ahead and blend. Here's a sponge and we're going to go ahead and just drag it down and blend it around. Here I am showing you can even use your fingers. It's a little messy, but if you don't mind the mess, it's great fun. Bringing in an eraser now. Any eraser will work. In this case, I am using something called the Vanish Eraser. Lots of fun. This is something I personally like to call the reduction technique, is when you use the eraser to start creating highlight shapes and your subject matter in your drawing. And we're going back to the Q-tip now. So I'm really working on creating my sky and making my sky a little darker, so when I go ahead and work on my clouds, that my clouds are actually going to show up a little stronger. And when we get to the clouds, we're actually going to use the eraser for that part. Here I am just kind of smoothing out all my shading. The sponge is great for that. And here we go with the eraser, where I am starting to draw in the clouds with my eraser. Now with clouds, it's really important that with whatever shape you choose to do, you make sure that you repeat the general shape over and over again, but keep the clouds different sizes. That's going to give you a more natural look to your landscape. Here I am kind of blocking in the sun, because the sun should be also one of the brightest areas on my landscape. So I'm making sure that some of that charcoal dust just doesn't sit there. Now I've gone back to the Q-tip, in the case of which I am actually darkening the underbelly of my clouds. So this is where the shadow would sit. And I'm carefully adding in just a slightly darker value here. We're going to do the same thing on the left side of the tree right here. And you'll notice it's just quick little horizontal marks and dashes and strokes, just really giving some shadow to my clouds and giving it that other dimension and value. Here we go, back to the stick. In this case, I'm going to start working on my tree bark. Now I'm keeping my strokes, fairly thick, but I'm also leaving some white space in between as well. This is important when we go for the shading. It's going to create that nice value later on. So just like this, I'm using it like a pencil, and I'm just starting to draw in my tree bark, and my branches. And we're switching to a Q-tip for the blending. And here you're going to see all the spots that I kept white are really shining through. This is going to allow me to keep the value in my tree. And for contrast's sake, we're going to bring back the charcoal piece and only cover about half that space with some nice dark strokes. You're going to notice that I don't cover a lot of the tree space because I want to keep the value. I also go back to my pencil, the original pencil that I sketched with, and I am just tightening up some of my edges. Sometimes charcoal can be a very loose medium, and if you want something to look a little bit tighter, you can always use a pencil. If you happen to have a charcoal pencil at home, that is suggested as well. And here we go, we're doing quick vertical grass-like strokes. I try to keep my strokes going in different directions and different lengths as well, and this is going to help with the illusion of grass in your foreground or around your tree. And here, pay note to where I place this grass. And here finally I'm putting some grass on the backmost hillside, and that's just to help us have this illusion that we have grass in the back and the front of our landscape. Now you'll notice that I really only added grass in 3 spots: the area that's closest to us, to the right of the tree, and the left of the tree. I don't want to cover all that space with grass because it's actually going to distract us and distract our eyes from the main subject matter, which is our tree, and we are currently working on the tree right now. Here I'm just going and using my charcoal stick, and you'll notice that the texture I'm creating is just a series of squiggly lines. I'm not trying to create individual leaves because when you look at a tree from far away, the chances of you seeing every individual leaf is not very high. It's actually based more on texture and the illusion of the eye. So here we are just doing a bunch of squiggly lines, and the key with creating a tree is knowing that it's a certain amount of layers that you're going to apply. And just for fun, I decided to put in another branch because it looked a little bare, a little naked. So we're gonna give it another little branch, make it fun. And now I'm using my Q-tip to blend those charcoal squiggly lines everywhere. This is a good time to also start to think about where the highlight areas of your tree are going to go. In this case, I'm planning on keeping most of my highlight areas near the top of my tree and possibly the right hand side of my tree. And you'll notice that I'm just not blending as much in those specific areas because I'm already pre-planning that's where my highlights will go. And now we go back to the eraser. How fun. We're just using our eraser to create some highlights in our landscape drawing today. Beautiful. And I just go back to a basic brush. You don't have to. You can use a paper towel. You could use your finger to kind of just re-blend and soften the look of the tree. If you use your finger or a paper towel to kind of wipe away some of the texture, you'll notice that your tree starts to look very soft and not as harsh. So at this point, I am pretty much working on my second or third layer of texture on this tree, and you'll notice that I will go back and I will start adding some more contrast, and I'm also going to, at the end, add some more highlight as well. So the foliage on this tree, I think, holds about 4 different texture layers, and something to remember is that the more texture you have, the more it's going to look like a tree. Here we go, we're adding in our charcoal stick again. This really is going to help us gain a lot of our darker shadows and our higher contrast. So as I said before, this process really is all about using your charcoal stick for all your darkest areas, your eraser for all your highlight areas, and using a combination of the Q-tip and or a brush to soften all of your midtones. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit so you can see the process in fast motion. Here we go, we're going back to the pencil, and like I said before, we like to use our pencil to tighten up any edges that we want to be a little more defined. In this case, I'm going to use the pencil a little bit here to define our leaves. So our leaves and the shadow areas of our tree become more defined. Maybe a few extra grass blades, because it never hurts to have a little extra. Here I am going ahead and just bringing back an eraser back into that sun area and allowing that the line that was defining the sun edge to be blended in a little bit, and taking the eraser to erase almost a halo on the outside edge of our sun. This is going to help us when we go in and draw in our birds. It's going to help some of our birds stand out a little bit more. So if you're going to do any kind of flying birds, I always like to go by the rule of 3s or 5s. Typically, rules of 3 is advised and just a little bit better visually, but if you want more than 3 birds, I'd say go with 5. Just try to stay away from even numbers. Now I'm just going back to my charcoal stick and working in a little darker lines into my bird that's closest to me. And you'll notice that when we created our birds, really it's as if you took the letter M and stretched it really far out, and then you created a diagonal line for the body of the bird. We went ahead and just for the tail of the bird, flared it out a little bit. And there you go. Now it's time to sign, and congratulations on your drawing.